Welcome to the UFO Woman Show. I'm your host, Melisa Kennedy. And on today's episode, my host comes from my home state of West Virginia. He is a UFO and paranormal investigator, and we have a lot in common. In fact, as we began our relationship back before UFO Con, and I invited him to be one of our speakers there, we realized that we have quite a few things in common besides just our home state. So please help me welcome Dave Spinks. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm awesome. I'm awesome. So before we get into, this whole UFO and paranormal conversation, let's talk just a second about last night's Super Bowl commercials. Did you watch the Super Bowl?
No, I did not.
Oh, man. Okay. All right. Well, that's okay because I'm going to tell you there were at least 6 UFO and alien type commercials. And it was cool because, to me, it was kind of like this soft disclosure with a little d of the UFO world. And if anybody's out there in the public that has no clue about UFOs, the commercials kind of gave a little insight. And I thought it was really cool. They had some space stuff. And anyway, it was pretty neat. Walmart had a really good one. A couple other big brands had some good UFO commercials. But anyway, it's kind of neat. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I heard about it, and it seems like that's the case a lot over the past several years. They've been slowly drip feeding us more and more, and it seems to be the theme nowadays with a lot of different things in movies and in all kinds of other things that they've been drip feeding this stuff through Hollywood and through other means. And I don't think there's no coincidence in that.
Oh, me too. I mean, and it makes our job just a little bit easier, but sometimes we have to go back and kind of re-educate, don't we? And not get the Hollywood version of UFOs and paranormal, but more factual, educational evidence that you and I, do for a living. So I agree. I think sci-fi and the TV commercials, the TV shows, the movies, all of it helps bring it to light. And then, folks like us have to kind of finish the sentence, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. If you would talk about this type of topic in the public, you would be labeled as crazy or Looney Tune, but I think it's working in the sense that talking about these type of phenomena and these ETs and UFOs and everything else is it's mainstream now. It's pop culture. It's even more so more widely accepted than it ever was. And I think that, one of the fears with the government was always if they came out and disclosed, just one day the president comes out and says, yep, we've been being visited by ETs for thousands of years and they're here with us now, or whatever the case, that it would cause a mass panic. And I think over the years, going back to the 50s, they've been slowly drip feeding this stuff, and it's now more widely accepted throughout the world, not just the United States.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, you and I both grew up in West Virginia. You live there now currently. And of course, I'm down here in Orlando. But, we grew up in a state that is, how should we say, conservative?
Bible Belt.
Yeah. Yeah. You could say that too,
pretty
right?
much. Yeah.
So, but yet you and I have a lot of shared experiences. I mean, our friendship really kind of started because of UFO Con, but then once we got to know each other, we realized that, oh my gosh, not only do we have West Virginia in common, but we have Arizona. You and I both lived in Arizona for a while, didn't we?
Yeah, during the Phoenix Lights incident. Yes.
So you want to tell us a little bit about what your experience with the Phoenix Lights was? Because I know you and I have shared it privately, but I think it might be really cool to kind of bring that out into the limelight and let people know what you and I have experienced there.
Well, it's kind of just surreal to me because I was in the U.S. Air Force at the time, stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and a lot of times in the Air Force or in the military in general, you would have instances where you'd get a phone call and it was an exercise, and you'd have to report like you're going to war, man. You would haul down to the your local staging point, that you had for each unit had their own, and you would stage up with the rest of your people in your unit, and you would get on an airplane and start flying around, like you're going to war. Well, that particular night that happened, and they never said this is an exercise. We went down, geared up like we were going somewhere for war, and sat in a hangar all night long, and then we're never told anything while we heard jet after jet taking off from our base, and the Phoenix Lights was going on in Phoenix, which is just a short, a couple of minute hop for a jet, to get up there. And we were just sitting there wondering what is going on, and our lieutenants and stuff and our COs would be just shut up, stop asking questions. You're on need to know, and you don't need to know anything, And then the next morning we were released and never told anything. And lo and behold, it was all over the news, the whole Phoenix Light stuff. So, as days went on, we kept inquiring, and we were told to shut up about it, don't talk about it. And little by little, each person in my unit began receiving orders, and we were shipped all over the world. I went to Italy. Many other people in my unit went many different places around the world. So it was almost to me like they tried to shut us up and send us all over the world, and then we weren't together. There's power in numbers, and they separated almost all of us.
Wow.
So it was very bizarre thing.
That is. And, I was there just as a civilian. I actually was a school teacher at the Gila Bend Indian Reservation. And I remember going out in my backyard, and I lived kind of on a golf course. So I had a nice shot out the back of some open skies. And I remember being out there. I was taking my dog out, and I looked up and I see this kind of reddish lights that were in sort of a V-shaped formation that was going across. I lived in West Phoenix at the time, and I saw this, and I remember picking up the phone, calling my grandmother in West Virginia there, and I was like, Mamaw, I don't know what I just saw, but I think maybe we're under attack. I thought the world was ending. I didn't know what I was seeing. So, as a civilian, somebody that was living in Phoenix at the time, I'll never forget that. It was life-changing. Mm-hmm. And you remember the next day, the newspapers there and, the local news?
It was everywhere.
It was.
It was a big, big deal. And not only a handful of people saw this, you're talking about thousands of people saw this.
Thousands.
2 Air Force bases were involved in this thing.
Luke.
My base and Luke Air Force Base.
Right.
And I'm sorry to tell you, I grew up on military bases. My stepdad was in the Air Force. I was in the Air Force. Those were not flares. Not at all. No way, any shape or form. Those were any kind of flares or chaff, as the pilots call it. They shoot those out when they're being tracked by heat-seeking missiles. Those are the type of flares that come out of airplanes, or possibly a spotting flare. And those flares are undulating with the wind in the sky. They're not going to fall free form perfectly straight in a line for the whole entire time they're burning. Those are no way those are flares.
Right. And it was in a formation. It was perfect.
Right. Yeah. What everyone saw. Mountain. Yeah. And what everybody saw was a perfect formation of lights that moved in unison. Yeah. They are not flares. So, that was the most idiotic thing I've ever heard in my life.
Right. And, I was 20, I would have been like in my early 20s at the time. So I hadn't really had a lot of, UFO knowledge, I guess you could say. I watched Star Wars, Star Trek, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all that kind of stuff. But to really see it with my own eyes and be a true eyewitness, I didn't know what I was seeing. I thought maybe the world was ending or something. I didn't know. Yeah. But man, oh man, it really started me on my journey into the whole, UFO investigating and just wanting to know more. Would you say the same thing goes for you, Dave, or does yours go back prior to that?
Well, I had a couple of other things happen to me, and I also saw some strange stuff in the sky when I was stationed at Davis Monthan. A friend of mine, I was still playing semi-pro baseball too at the time.
Oh, okay.
out in Tucson while I was in the Air Force.
Nice.
And a friend of mine had just built a brand new house in a brand new housing development out on the west side of Tucson. It was way out there.
Yeah.
And his was the first house that was done in the neighborhood, and him and his wife had a housewarming party, and there was like 20 of us out there. We were grilling out, having a good time, and then one of the guys looks up and was pointing and says, "What the heck is that?"
Oh, wow.
And we saw a perfectly round object
So a disc.
that was,
Like
yeah,
a,
well, no, it looked more like a basketball. I mean, it was,
oh.
it was perfectly round like a ball, and it was hovering probably about 10,000 feet, and it dropped down real
Oh.
slow in almost a hover, but it came down to about 2,000 feet. Now, out there in the desert, you can see the sky
Oh,
unreal
yes.
out there.
Oh, yes.
And it was bright. It was bigger than any star. And it dropped down, hovered for about 30 seconds. We're all standing there just in awe of this thing. And then it shot straight up into space and was gone without making one single sound.
Wow. And this was
And so,
near Tucson, right?
yeah, on the outskirts of Tucson. And, that whole area is known as the UFO highway, they call it. And there's the Native Americans, talk about the star people and everything else out there.
Oh, yeah.
And there's been just thousands upon thousands of sightings
Oh, absolutely. Well,
cylindrical craft.
Oh, well, there's vortexes. We know that for a fact.
All over the place. Sedona.
Oh, yeah, Sedona. Yeah. Oh, I love Sedona.
Sedona's a major.
Yes, yes. Well, when I was a school teacher there in Gila Bend on their Indian reservation, I learned so much about their culture, their belief systems. It was absolutely fantastic. It really got me kind of, wrapped up in this whole UFO, space related type interest, and went up to Sedona a few times, and oh my gosh, just fell in love with it. Want to go back? Can't wait to go back. So you and I got that in common, don't we, Dave? We've got that bond that we both saw the Phoenix Lights, and that's just life changing. But we also grew up in West Virginia, and you're still in West Virginia, so you're in the southern part, right?
Almost south central, right below the center of the state.
Okay, and I was north central, so.
Yeah, and I'm almost like barely an hour from Virginia,
Okay.
So,
yeah.
It's really bizarre how, people meet, and I don't think people meet for coincidences. Here we are, we're both born native West Virginians, and we end up in some of the same places.
Right.
And that is just bizarre and not coincidental in my point of view.
I agree.
And we met through a mutual friend of mine and yours too, which is even more bizarre. Yeah. So
I know. Oh, I know. I mean, nothing's coincidence, right? This is all supposed to happen, and I'm grateful for people like you and to call you my friend and have this shared experience together, and just being able to have somebody else that knows where I grew up and knows the area. And then, of course, you throw in Phoenix to the mix, and it's like, oh my gosh, you and I are just like so connected with all this UFO stuff. It's so cool. Now, you do a lot of paranormal activity and paranormal investigating. I definitely want to talk about that as well. But before we get to that, let's touch a little bit more on some UFO activity, because I know you've had lots of investigations. You've written a few books. I want to talk about that. You've been on countless TV shows. There's so many I can't even keep up with you. Your list just goes on and on and on. I mean, you're everywhere, Dave. So bring us up to speed as to what you got going on, what you've been doing, so our audience knows more about you and where they can find you online and on TV shows and things like that.
Yeah, well, the TV stuff just came about recently over the last 2 or 3 years for me, and that's just a bonus to what I do. I have a passion for this stuff. I think a lot of it's all interconnected in a lot of different ways. And it's really humbling to me to be able to share my experiences and what I do on TV to the masses. It's really cool, but that's not why I do what I do. To me, what I do is some of man's greatest questions. Are we alone in the universe? Are there unknown creatures walking among us? And what happens to us when we die? To me, that's still uncharted territory for us as human beings. We're still seeking answers to those questions. We might have a little bit of piece of the puzzle, but we don't have the whole piece. Will we ever? I don't know. But the journey getting there to me is what it's all about, and it's just fascinating to me, some of the stuff that you see and you encounter and you experience in your search for answers, and you get to hear and meet all these great people who've had similar type of experiences, and they share and you share with each other, and it just brings more validity to all of it, because let's face it, not everyone's a kook or a nut. There's some very, very intellectual people, very educated people, to include astronauts, military members, law enforcement officers, doctors, lawyers, teachers, that have something to lose by going public and sharing their stories and their experiences and their sightings with us. And to put that in a public venue, yeah, they could be labeled, and they're taking a serious risk to their persona and what they do by sharing those stories. And to me, that's very, very important, because they're not going to just come out and make that stuff up to risk their reputations. They really truly have had a mind-blowing, life-altering experience of some sort that they want other people to know about. And that's when we share things like that with each other, it just brings a lot of validity to all of it, for me anyway.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, I know, for myself, being a former school teacher, everything I do is for educational purposes. And even though I'm not teaching school anymore, I still really believe that I am still educating, and it's just in a different venue. So yeah, I've definitely put my name on the line and my reputation. You have wonderful credentials with your military experience. And weren't you a law officer or something like that?
Yeah, I was a federal law enforcement officer with the Bureau of Prisons, and one of my jobs was to transport high-profile terrorists and mobsters all around the country with the U.S. Marshals, and of course work in the prison system.
Yeah.
So, I couldn't come out when I was still working in law enforcement. I was actively investigating paranormal phenomena, whether it be UFOs, cryptids, and hauntings. And I couldn't really go public with that, because I would have been sent to the head shrinker,
Yeah, exactly.
and that's still a label today. You still have to kind of be careful. And there's a lot of law enforcement officers that moonlight on the side as paranormal investigators, because there's so many times, and I've talked to so many different law enforcement officers over the years that have had either gone on calls where strange events were occurring, or, they had an experience themselves, and they were out there investigating them, and they want to know more.
But they're afraid to come out sometimes, aren't they? Yeah.
Right,
and
because
that's sad.
because of the labeling, and go see the head shrinker, Spinks, whatever. But
well, I know you've got your credentials, and I know that everything that you do, Dave, is thoroughly investigated, and you're not one of these guys that's just going to fake stuff just to be on TV. And that's one of the things I love most about you, is that I feel like you and I are very much similar in that way, that I'm going to debunk and prove things probably 90 to 95% of the time, but it's that other 5 to 10%. And it just takes one evidence, one key piece of evidence for all of us that is just undisputed, and there's no way to debunk it. There's no way to say it's anything else. And that's what all of us are really working towards. And I know you have several cases that you've done. What would you say is like your best UFO investigation?
Ooh, there's a bunch of them. There's the thing is that, in the paranormal realm as a whole, sometimes there is no scientific explanation up until this point. We don't have a way to recreate some of this stuff in a lab scientifically, to use the scientific model. That's why it's called the paranormal. Let's face it,
Right.
But you have to also take into account people's experiences, because you can't deny telling someone that, they saw this or they had this experience, because you weren't there, number one. Okay. And barring having them sent to a shrink, and having a full mental rundown, you have to take their word as to what they say they experienced and whatnot. And then you can go in and investigate and see if you can document anything that's similar. That's about the best we can do at this point in time with what we're doing.
Right.
But to try to give some validation to their story or their experiences. So there's no way, in a lot of chances, we can validate everything in the paranormal, because we don't actually know what we're dealing with. We don't know if we're dealing with ETs, some kind of angelic entity or demonic entity.
Interdimensional, maybe
Right, or
interdimensional.
we don't know at this point what we're,
Right.
it could be one thing that's causing all these things. We just don't know at
True.
this point.
Good point. Good
know,
point. Yeah, no, I
so
agree. Well,
I mean,
but let's bring it back to the real life. As a law enforcement officer, when you get an eyewitness, is that not enough evidence in a lot of courts to be
yes,
enough? Okay.
100%.
All
Almost
right.
100%, unless they're lying, so
Yeah.
and you have to prove they're lying. So I mean,
So that's kind of
there you go.
evidence, right? I
Yeah.
mean, just
That's what they
saying.
use in an eyewitness lineup. Somebody gets mugged or whatever.
Yep.
They're going to bring that person in and they're going to stick 5 or 10 guys in a room and say, point them out. And then if they point you out, you're hit. You're
it. That's
you're going down.
Well, you and I for sure saw the Phoenix Lights together, and we know all about that. And that the 25th anniversary is coming up. I can't believe it's been that long. Can you?
Yeah, getting old.
We are getting old. I don't know, man. I'm like, oh, geez. All right. But yeah, that happened almost 25 years ago. So gosh, that's just crazy to me. But so let's talk about West Virginia. I grew up in a little town called Bridgeport, which is north central West Virginia. And I know some neighbors of mine have just recently validated that they had UFO encounters on my street. They were neighbors of mine, just a few houses down. So I'm just saying, cue the music here, da 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 da.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny to me, and I'm sure you can relate to this. People start to come to us, don't they? And they share these stories with us.
Yeah.
And man, oh man, I tell you, it just starts really giving me some validity in my life and starts putting pieces of my puzzle together. Now, have you had that experience in West Virginia and people come up to you and say, hey, Dave, I've got this story to share with you?
Yeah, I mean, I get reports almost at least weekly because my name is out there now.
Right.
People know what I do, and they want some. The cops aren't when they call in and they have an experience like that. They call the local 911. They're going to be, I've got another UFO, and laugh at them and hang up. And then so we become a reporting center ourselves,
yes,
so to speak, because people need that outlet to share their experiences, and they want answers.
Yeah. Well, they want to know that they're not crazy. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You need that validity a little bit. You need to share your common experiences with somebody. And, growing up in a small little state like West Virginia, I mean, we're all so close, wouldn't you say? I mean, even though I technically didn't know you growing up, it's like we've got that bond of being a West Virginian. And there's just something to be said about somebody from our home state. We seem to have this little bond together. And when you could talk to somebody else from West Virginia about this really unusual experience, I don't know, it's comforting in a way to know, hey, they're one of us. They're one
thing about West Virginia too is they are less apt to talk to non-locals than they are us. It's kind of a tight-knit community, as you said. They may have had some of the craziest experiences you can imagine, but they're not going to tell it to Joe Blow that's not from West Virginia or not even from their local area a lot of times.
Yeah, true.
It's very county by county almost, as you know. When we meet someone else from West Virginia, the first question, what county are you from?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the first questions you get. What county are you from?
What county are you from?
So that's kind of how it works here. And every county, in the monster realm anyway, they have their own name for Bigfoot or their own name for this creature. So,
right.
You'll have all these different names for one particular type creature, which I find
let's talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah. I mean, where my grandmother, her farm and everything, they've got the Grafton Monster. Well, I think we all know what that probably was. What are some other names that you can share with us that you?
Oh, you got the Yahoo, you got the Blue Devil, you got Sasquatch, Bigfoot, you got the Wampus Cat. I mean, you can go on and on. The Hairy Men of the Woods. I mean, you've got it. Wild Man is another one. I mean, there's so many of them, and it's almost county by county. I tell you. I mean,
yeah.
And I talk about it. I talk a little bit about that in my West Virginia Bigfoot book. And you know, it's kind of funny because you'll meet all these different people. Yeah, I saw a Yahoo, and if you're not from West Virginia, you'll be like, what the hell is a Yahoo? You know,
What is that? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
so I kind of tried to get that out there to the masses, and talk about different names that people in West Virginia in particular have for this creature. So
Right. Well, speaking of counties, let's talk about Braxton County, Flatwoods, West Virginia. It was
oh yeah.
big UFO crash. If anybody watches the History Channel show called Project Blue Book, it has been a massive topic of conversation in that show. And you have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. And I grew up not too far from there myself. So let's talk about that and your new book out, the UFO book that you have.
Well, yeah, I was born in Braxton County because I'm from Nicholas County, but that was the closest hospital back in those days. So I was actually born right down the road, like not even 5 miles from where the whole Flatwoods Braxton County monster incident happened, and grew up hearing all these tales. My mom's first cousins actually went to school with the kids that had the encounter, and I heard stories growing up of how terrified they were to even walk to school or walk home from school, because they were scared to death of the Braxton County monster or the Flatwoods monster.
Well, they even had a mob, didn't they? Didn't they have a mob kind of outside their farm there, and people were protesting and calling them all kinds of names?
So I'll just give a rundown on the whole scenario. Yeah. 1952, mass UFO wave over the East Coast. UFOs were seen over the White House, everything else. Excuse me. Our pilots were ordered to chase these objects down and shoot them down if they could. Obviously, we didn't know if it was the Russians or whoever were invading our airspace. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't them, we needed to find out who it was. So, of course, and in the pursuit of technology back in those days, of course, they wanted to shoot those down and try to reverse engineer any kind of technology that we didn't have, so we could utilize it for our own military purposes. So it makes sense that our pilots were told to do that. And of course, we can't have unknown craft flying over our skies. Right. That's just, you can't have that.
National security.
So that day in September 1952, some local kids were playing football in their grade school there, right down the road from where this happened. They all saw a fiery object come overhead. It wasn't a meteor because numerous witnesses also saw it, adults, and it made controlled turns and came down on what then was called the Fisher Farm. Mm-hmm. And the boys all ran home. They lived right next to the Fisher Farm, told their mom what happened. Their older cousin happened to be there who was in the National Guard. He was like 19 at the time. They all grabbed flashlights and headed up to the Fisher Farm. They had to hop a cattle fence and go up the hill. Well, as they got closer to where it happened, there was these noxious fumes all over the place, and they say their eyes began to burn and they began choking. And it was real nasty type of fumes, smelled sulfury in nature. And 2 of the boys reported in their statements that they saw a craft down over the hill in a little gully there when they were walking up the road on the Fisher Farm. One of the boys happened to turn to his left with his flashlight because it was dark by the time they got up there. And it's only half a mile or less to the crash site, supposed crash site. He turned with his flashlight, and standing under a 12-foot tall oak tree limb was this 10-foot tall green monster that had portals for eyes, and beams of light were coming out of this thing's eyes, almost like there were portals. And there was something inside this metallic suit controlling it. And of course, they saw the thing. He screamed. They all turned and saw it. They all screamed, and they got out of there and ran back down. And one of the Fred and Eddie May, the 2 boys that are still alive today, the last 2 remaining known eyewitnesses, said that they saw their mom leap a 8-foot cattle fence in one single bound. Like she went boom and leaped over this thing.
Wow.
That's how scared they were. So of course they called local law enforcement. Long story short, numerous investigators came in, paranormal wise, UFO investigators. They interviewed all the kids separately. And what I find was very interesting is that they were asked to draw what they saw separately in different rooms. And they all drew something that was very, very similar in nature. And when they it was determined that none of them were lying when they did the interviews because of the way they interviewed them. And then the very next day, what's compelling about this is there was a whole nother instance right down the road in Strange Creek, about 10 to 12, 15 miles away, of a young couple who was returning from a vacation in Ohio back to New York, and they decided they took the scenic route through West Virginia. Well, their car just quit in the middle of the road for no reason whatsoever. The man got out. His name was George Snatowski. The baby started crying and carrying on terribly in the back seat, and those same noxious fumes began to be present. And he couldn't figure out what was wrong with the car. He just had it serviced before their trips. It had a newer battery in it, nothing wrong. And he thought the car was on fire because of these fumes that the family was experiencing. Well, after checking out the car numerous times, couldn't figure out what was wrong. He noticed a strange white purplish glow into the woods off the road over the guardrail. So he walked over there and saw what he described as a giant globe-like object hovering. So he wanted to know what it was, so he started walking towards it. As he walked towards it and got closer, he said it felt like a million needles went into his body and he was being shocked. He became violently ill, fell to the ground, and it was everything he could do to get back up and try to make his way back to his family at the car. Well, as he got close enough to the car, he saw his wife looking out the passenger side window, and she was looking past him. And she let out a blood-curdling scream, and he looked behind him and saw this massive humanoid creature coming at him. He ran to the car, fumbled like crazy trying to get in, and they cowered in the car together as a family. Didn't know what to do. He reached in the glove box. He had a camping knife he kept in there, and they huddled with their baby. You know, the 1950 cars were huge, so they could get down in the front seat. After several minutes, he decided to look up above the dash and see what he could see. And when he did that, he saw this same type of creature that was described as the kid from the kids the night before, kind of inspecting the car. A long spindly arm came down, was feeling the car as if it was trying to figure out what this car was. And then it just simply turned and glided away. So being terrified, as you can imagine, the family kind of waited a few minutes and they got back up, and then they saw that object rise up in the sky a couple thousand feet, start swaying like a pendulum, and shoot away with a trail of spark lights behind it, and disappeared without a sound. And there's a whole nother story 2 weeks later in Parkersburg of another similarly described creature. So
Wow.
It wasn't just one instance. It was a whole flurry of things that went on.
And see,
the
we
National
don't hear.
Guard.
Yeah, but we don't hear about those very much, do we?
No, and that whole case, you know, you can look it up, and there's a lot more to it. There was a National Guard Special Forces unit was on the ground within an hour after the crash. So that tells me the Pentagon was tracking these objects.
Absolutely.
And
the
there's a whole lot more.
Men in Black showed up, didn't they? Now,
Men in Black were seen in the town. I mean, all kinds of things.
Now,
it was swept under the rug. That story was swept under the rug.
I mean, I grew up not far from there, and I don't know that I've ever heard that story, Dave. You just told about the second sighting there in the Flatwoods area. Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, you're right about the 1950s cars. I mean, those things were like battleships.
Boats, yeah, man. Tanks.
I want one personally, you know. I know I'd be good. But, you know, I think somewhere I heard that the boys, didn't they suffer some sickness and things like that from
Well,
so
that's
close?
what the rumor is. I've talked to one of them a couple of times, and he said that some of the stuff that you hear is not true.
Okay, okay.
But there was also a cover-up, too, as well.
Oh.
The Captain Levitt at the time was ordered by the Pentagon. He came out many years later and gave an interview to a man named Rashino that wrote the book about this. And he said that he was ordered to collect any samples, bring back anything he could post haste to the Pentagon.
Wow.
So while they were out there on the Fisher farm, they found some oily substance, and they saw indentions in the ground where the other two boys saw this supposed craft.
Oh.
And he collected samples, sent them off to the Pentagon, and never heard another peep about it. And he said in his mind it was a definite cover up because he was never told anything else. He inquired about it, never got a response from his superiors.
Right. Now,
So
do you know if there were any eyewitnesses that were seen, or maybe they heard about the military taking a craft out of Flatwoods? Do you hear anything
there's
like
some
that?
scuttlebutt
Or
about it, but
okay,
all the people that were alive at that time, they're all dead. So
wow.
it's a shame. It's a shame. And here's the thing too: when that special forces unit was sent in there,
Hmm.
they broke their team up into two groups because they sent one group down on the Elk River to look for a supposed downed
Oh,
airplane, and the other half of the group, which was current Captain Levitt's group, his men, he separated them into two groups. They came in covertly on an old logging road on the Fisher farm.
wow.
So they deliberately did, deception by doing that. So they had everybody looking for a downed airplane.
Hmm.
They said an airplane crash. Why they really
Airplane
went,
crash.
yeah,
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 exactly.
why they went in on the Fisher farm to see what was really going down.
Right. And
So,
the cover up is just massive here. I mean, we're talking
mhm.
about, bringing in the military, all men in black, all this other stuff. Now, wasn't the mother of the boys, was she single or widowed or
Yeah, she was
okay.
by herself.
She was
Yes.
by herself, and didn't
Yep.
they try to really ruin her reputation? I mean,
Yeah,
they called her
half the
crazy.
town. Well, see, half the town was people were scared to death. Okay, it's the height of it's the Cold War was getting heating up. The people were thinking it was the Russians. This, that, and the other. And some of the kids were so terrified that they didn't want to go outside or anything. So the parents, there was a mass panic going on in the
Right.
whole town. Just like some of my family members said, they were scared to death because the Flatwoods Monster was going to get them.
Right.
So, in that situation, a lot of parents are going to tell their kids, it's a bunch of hogwash. They're making that up.
Yeah.
Don't listen to them.
Kind of
So
like
you
what we
got that
do.
going on.
Yeah, when we
Right.
when our kids have a nightmare, what do? We tell them to,
Right.
just go to sleep. It's nothing, right?
Yeah, it's just common sense. That's what you tell your kids because you still got to live life and you still got to go on. You can't be living in the house scared. And that's just what people do. So they're going to label these poor folks as being kooks, nuts,
Yep.
crazy, whatever. And when you talk to the May boys who are still alive, they tell you they wish it never happened.
Oh, sure. Which sounds
They got
really
in fights
familiar.
at school. They had all kinds of people, all giving them crap all the time.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you can imagine, what they
Oh,
went.
they probably were bullied and everything else, I'm sure.
Yes. Yep.
And
Yep.
it sounds very familiar, a little bit like the Roswell incident. The poor farmer that had, the UFO crash on his property regretted it from the day that
Hmm.
he said anything about it. And,
Hmm.
so you start to see this trend of cover up, deny, manipulate, brainwash, destroy. I mean,
Hmm.
it's an ongoing thing that we're seeing in the UFO community, and it's starting to make a lot of sense when you connect the dots and the similarities here. Now, you talk a lot about this particular incident in Flatwoods in your West Virginia UFO book, and
Right.
it's a fantastic book. I know that you've talked about more incidences besides just Flatwoods, but on the cover you do have an illustration of the Flatwoods monster, and it's really cool. And there's a museum there in Flatwoods, which I recommend
Yep.
everybody going to and supporting, what they do, which is fantastic. Now, you mentioned Parkersburg. Tell me a little bit about that. What do you know about the Parkersburg incident?
Well, it was people think that it was still part of the Flatwoods Monster incident because there people theorized that when one of these things was possibly shot down or crashed down,
Hmm.
that there was some sort of ET or alien rescue mission going on in West Virginia because a similar type creature was found in Parkersburg, but they found a charred, burned body that was
Oh,
really crazy. And but there was also a police cover up going on at the same time.
yeah.
So the government had already been in here telling local law enforcement, you don't talk about this as matter of national security.
Yeah.
And back in those days, people were way more patriotic than they are now, and they listened to what the authorities told them because of World War II was recently just over, and they would tell people, hey, could be the Russians, could be this, could be that, and scared the heck out of people. And people listened to the government. They did what they told them. just like in Project Blue Book, they come in and they would just say, "Oh, it was a giant owl you saw. You know, it wasn't this, it
Yes.
wasn't
Oh,
that."
yes, the giant
Okay,
owl.
and they took that to the bank, you know, because that's just how people were those days.
Well,
You
they
know, we
didn't
just
think anybody would lie to them. I mean,
right,
they believed that whatever they were told was the truth, and they
absolutely.
took that to the grave with them. And you know, no, for people that aren't familiar with the state of West Virginia, Flatwoods and Parkersburg really aren't that far apart. I mean,
Mm-mm.
you know, it's a certainly by flight, by air, it would be a very short distance. But
Yeah, and there was not only one object seen that night. There was at least six, I think maybe 6 or 7 that were seen flying all the way down the East Coast over West Virginia and went all the way down to Georgia.
oh
The
my,
same
I
group
didn't
of
know that.
objects.
Oh,
Yeah, and so
really?
it was several objects, and our pilots were chasing these things.
Wow.
And during the 50s, especially 52, we lost numerous pilots in these chases, and the government covered it up as training accidents. You
Of
know,
course.
and that's, you know, they talk a little bit about that in Project Blue Book, the show too.
Yeah, they do. They
These
do.
these pilots died chasing these things. Another West Virginian, Mantell, was chasing a UFO, and
Hmm.
he was a graduate of West Virginia University, and
Okay.
he died in Kentucky chasing one of these
Oh, did he? Okay. No,
things. Yes,
I've heard of him, but I didn't
Captain
realize it was
Mantell.
Kentucky. Yeah. Okay. So he
Yep.
was chasing a UFO in
Yeah,
Kentucky, and was he shot down?
they don't know.
They don't know. Oh,
And
interesting.
this guy, decorated World War II pilot. He was a very good pilot, and numerous airstrips saw this object, and this object was massive. And of course, there was a cover up, and he said they ruined his reputation, tried to ruin him as a pilot. Said it was pilot error, and he was chasing the planet Venus. Now,
Wow.
I talk about that story in my West Virginia UFOs book too, because he was a graduate of West Virginia University,
Hmm.
and it's a very famously known UFO case.
Yes.
And if you put everything together, it's definitely a cover up. He was not chasing a planet. He knew the difference between a planet and an object of unknown origins.
Wow.
So, you know, there's just so many things. And West Virginia, as a whole, has a ton of ufology connections. Right now, today, and I find this very interesting. So, right after the Flatwoods Monster incident, guess what was created in West Virginia? The
What,
Green
Dave?
Bank,
Tell
a
us.
government-funded project called the Green Bank Observatory.
Yes, Green Bank. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Oh
So a
yes.
lot of people haven't really, I don't know, they haven't really put that together.
Right,
But
right.
there is a government-funded project that is built to search for extraterrestrial life. And
Hmm.
right now, today, they are searching for ET right here in West Virginia. Now, that's no coincidence to me.
It's not. Yeah,
We're a
not.
very rural state
Yeah,
where
and it's
that
easy.
where
And
that
it's easy to hide this stuff, isn't it, Dave? I mean,
yes,
you
there's no
know,
people out there hardly at all, except for a few locals.
a few locals here and there scattered. So I
Mhm.
gotta ask the hard question, Dave. Do we have alien bases in West Virginia? Yes or no?
I would say it's a definite possibility
Definite
because
possibility. Okay.
there is a ton of underground stuff here in West Virginia with the coal mines. It would be easy for the government to come into an old abandoned coal mine, convert it into an underground facility, and we do have underground facilities here in West Virginia, such as the Greenbrier Hotel.
Yes.
Built,
Yes. The bunker.
the bunker is
Hmm.
still there today and can still be operational if needed. They built it right under a very fancy resort hotel, you know,
Yes.
and it was there for several years until it was accidentally leaked, and it was to house the president and the cabinet in case of a nuclear war.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. So there's a
and they
lot of
built it.
hidden places, isn't there?
Yes,
I mean,
yes, there
if
is.
you haven't been in a coal mine, guys, I'm here to tell you, I've been in one, and it is, oh my gosh. I mean, it's so hidden. It's so easy to do something like a hidden base, whether it's the military or it could be, you know, cryptids, extraterrestrials, alien bases. It would be no big deal to have something like that hidden in West Virginia, and no one would be the wiser.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the Green Bank, okay, just think about this. Okay, they're sending signals to space trying to communicate with ETs, right?
Right.
What if they answered?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
we have, if you read my book, there is so many sightings of strange craft in the sky here in the Mountain State. What if they just followed our signal straight back to the Green Bank and
Yeah.
they're flying around the state?
Just
Because
going around.
Yeah, and I mean and I've got encounters in my book that date back to the late 1700s and 1800s.
All the way
So,
back. Hmm.
and there was nothing in the sky that we had at that time that could describe what people were seeing.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
This is
nowadays,
before airplanes. This is before a lot of things.
right. Right.
So,
Nowadays, we've got some military development that we
right,
know that we could actually be
absolutely,
seeing some of our own UFOs.
yes,
In West Virginia, I mean, it is such a rural state. They don't call it the Mountain State for nothing, do they?
no.
So, I mean, it's
And
beautiful.
where that Green Bank is, the big telescope is the largest movable land object in the world. So
Woo.
if that tells you anything, the
Yeah.
big telescope they have there, radio telescope,
Yeah. Let that
it's the
sink in for a
largest
second.
movable object in the world. That's saying something, okay?
It is.
And that whole area is situated in the Monongahela National Forest. It's national property. It's
Hmm.
owned by the government.
Of course.
And so when Obama was in, they started losing money, right? I mean,
Right.
he was cutting a bunch of government funded projects. So back in, or let me backtrack.
Okay.
So let's go back to when they built the observatory.
Okay.
So a young man named Frank Drake was the first astronomer, the radio astronomer there, and he and Carl Sagan started SETI right here in West Virginia. So what does that tell you, folks?
Hmm.
SETI was started right here in Green Bank, West Virginia, right after the Flatwoods Monster incident. There's no coincidence in that, and now it's
No.
continuing to this day. So moving forward, when Obama was in office, they started cutting a bunch of government-funded programs. The Green Bank was going to have to shut down, and this guy named Yuri Milner, who was a Russian billionaire, stepped in and said, "Look, I will donate 10 million of my own dollars to fund this project, but you have to dedicate X amount of time to keep the search for ETs going." And him and what's his name, the real smart man that was in the wheelchair that just died recently.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
those two, you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Him and
Stephen
Frank
Hawking.
Drake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, Steve Hawkins.
Yeah.
Yes. Those gentlemen, Yuri Milner, Stephen Hawking, Frank Drake, and several others, created the Breakthrough Listen project.
Hmm.
And it was all part of that situation. And it's going on right now in West Virginia
Oh,
at Green
absolutely.
Bank.
Well,
So,
we know that the Russians and the Americans have had a correlation there with the space,
mhm,
exploration and things like that. I mean, I remember. I mean, we both grew up in the '80s, right? And we remember kind of some of that, Cold War type stuff that they were trying to
yep,
tell us that, the Russians, this and that. And it was just all a front. I mean, it really was, because a lot of what they were trying to tell us on the news was really just a backstory of collaborating with them for, space. I mean,
hmm yeah.
so I'm
Well,
not
and you got to remember
surprised.
when President Reagan was president, when he gave that famous UN speech, and he talked about, he sometimes wonders if we were attacked by an outside threat, if we would come together as a world
Yeah.
organization to fight this outside threat. And remember, he developed the whole Star Wars program.
Yes, he did.
So that was not just for uh, defense of the so-called Russians. It was for something attacking us from outer space.
Right.
So, if you look in and read into that, that's a very compelling speech he gave. And everybody, a lot of people that are ufologists know about it, and people that are interested in. But if you start putting all this stuff together, I mean, it's mind blowing.
Oh, it really is. And I mean, we're still learning more and more information on a weekly basis. And for those of you that are watching that don't know the story about Ronald Reagan, did you know he was one of the presidents, one of two presidents, that actually had a UFO encounter? He saw a UFO outside his airplane window,
hmm
along with several other in the plane, including the pilot. And I really do believe that sparked his whole interest in UFO exploration, space exploration. Don't you agree, Dave, that
Yeah,
had to have
absolutely.
some?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Jimmy Carter was the other one, by the way, for
Jimmy
those of
Carter.
you that
Yep.
wanted to know.
So, and a lot of big time people have claimed to see UFOs too. People in the ranking members of government, of course, astronauts. They've all come up. most of them have come out and all but said there's aliens out there. I mean, there's ETs that have visited us and are visiting us. So, you've got to look at that hard and say, yeah, okay, these guys have. I mean, they're the best of the best. They're not going to make up stuff like that.
Exactly.
Just not going to happen.
No, well, gosh, no, they couldn't. I mean, they're not in a position to just make stuff up. It would ruin their career.
And they want answers too, and they feel the people of this world have the right to know.
Right.
And so it's mind blowing stuff. Oh, and here's another interesting thing about West Virginia. In Clarksburg, near your hometown, there is a whole NASA center that's just been totally refurbished.
Yes, there's the
gigantic communication dishes out there.
Yes, and it's funny because I used to, and along with my mother, used to put on piano concerts right there in that location where that library is housed.
Yep.
Coincidence? Yep. I don't think so.
No.
I've been there many, many times.
And they just put a lot of money into that thing recently, too. So, and it's got these big, gigantic dishes out there.
Right. And isn't it the biggest collection of UFO books and research, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's some crazy stuff.
It really is.
It's right there off of 79. I mean, you can't miss it when you're driving by. I mean, it's a huge NASA complex right there in West Virginia.
Right in West Virginia.
And we've got the Green Bank and everything else. So it's fascinating stuff. There's a lot of ties to ufology right here in West Virginia. The very beginnings of ufology, right here in West Virginia.
Truly the beginnings. Yeah. Yep. Truly the beginnings of it, and a lot of the research that happened there. So we got to touch on one more very famous West Virginia story, and that is the Mothman. We got to talk about that. Tell us the story of the Mothman, because I know you've also done a lot of research with that too.
Well, in the 60s, there was this mass wave of this bird-like creature sighted throughout Point Pleasant, but it was actually sighted in Clendenin, West Virginia first by a group of men digging a grave. They reported seeing this large humanoid creature with giant wings fly right over their head. And then just a day or two later, the Mothman sighting started happening in Point Pleasant. And what happened was, hundreds of people were seeing this thing, and it all culminated in the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Now, throughout the world, the Mothman has been reported everywhere, right before major disasters happen. So some think it's trying to warn us. Others think it's causing these things to happen.
What do you think? Do you think it's?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, it could go either way, in my book. But what people don't realize is during and this went on for years, mind you. Okay. Even after the collapse of the bridge, the Mothman was still being sighted in the area. What people don't realize is during that whole time, there was hundreds of people, and if not hundreds, thousands of sightings of strange craft and lights in the sky all around Point Pleasant and the Ohio area right there. And it was so much, in fact, that people would come home from work, eat dinner, and they would go out on the road that led to the bunkers, and they would park their cars and have UFO watch parties.
Oh man, I wish I was alive then.
We were alive, but we were little.
Well, I was born in the 70s, but yeah.
Well, I'm older than you, so so it was so. But there are countless upon countless newspaper articles from numerous eyewitnesses over and over again, seeing these craft, seeing these lights in the sky, and some of them even had seen the Mothman flying with a UFO above its head,
like that's
above
so
it.
Cool. That's so cool.
Is it an interdimensional being? Is it an ET?
Yeah.
Don't know. If you go back to ancient times, there was a creature called, or a deity, I should say, called Pazuzu. And its description is very similar to what is the modern day Mothman. Humanoid creature, black in color with bright, shiny red eyes, and it flies. It's got wings. So there are still Mothman sightings reported in West Virginia to this day.
And a couple other states in the United States have been reporting similar creatures, correct?
Yeah, there's been a whole supposed rash of sightings in Chicago, but some other investigators have looked into that and can't really verify it. So but you never know.
You never know.
There's always some truth to every story
There's always
out there.
a thread of truth, isn't there?
Yep.
That's one of my kind of trademarked type slogans for UFOCon is the truth is galactic. And let's talk about UFOCon. I'm bringing you back in April here in Orlando. Can't wait.
Super excited. Super excited. Yeah, I love.
Yes.
Had a great first one. I thought it went off very, very well.
Well, the second one's going to be bigger and better. It's a 2-day convention, actually. We've got you coming. We have a lot of the guys from Ancient Aliens. We have the Ghost Hunter guy, which is Grant Wilson, coming. So we're really excited to really be bridging the gap between UFO and paranormal. And certainly you fit that mold very nicely, Dave. And, you've got lots of books out there. Gosh, how many books have you written?
Let's see, one.
Loose count.
I think 5 right now.
5
but
books
I've got,
so far.
Yeah, I've got more in the works too. But I mean, it's just all these years of doing this stuff. I've just putting in my stuff on paper. I was encouraged to do so that's what I'm doing.
And that is fantastic. I tell you what, Dave, I got to get you back on the UFO Woman show because we didn't even have time to talk about all your paranormal investigations. So lots more to cover and definitely want to get you back on. But if I don't get you back on before April, I will see you at UFOCon. And if you want some more information about that, go to theufocon.com. Find out more about Dave Spinks. He's an awesome guy, and I am just so thankful to have you here and appreciate your time. And until next time, I am Melisa Kennedy for the UFO Woman Show. Keep looking up.